Welcome to the Stephen Sayoun podcast.
Pat, tell me a little bit about how you got into coaching. I'm obviously a big follower of yours. I've done your Rethinking the Big Patterns course, and it really resonated with me in terms of like looking at Bill Hartman's work and kind of solidified some of the questions that I had in my head, looking at just like human movement in general. Before we delve into that, I just want to know a little bit more about you, how you got into coaching, just so the audience can find a bit more about your background, as there's not many old school coaches that I believe walk the walk and talk the talk. So I guess I'll let you have a little dig at that. And
yeah, I think, I just participating in sports and competing has been a part of my life for a long time. And it was really kind of like my rock, my safe place when I was a kid. I just, I excelled in sports, and I found like I'm definitely like an obsessive person. Like when I find something I like, I'm gonna go all in on it. And I was pretty good at baseball in particular, and I was hoping to be able to play at a high level in college and then potentially professionally. And ultimately that didn't. I played in college. It didn't really work out for me, and I ended up back home. Really just kind of working a bad, crappy job. And this is, the early 2000s, late 90s period, So I just was, kind of going nowhere in life, to tell you the truth. I was really struggling with substance abuse at the time, and, just, I don't know, like kind of looking at some futures that weren't too pretty, to tell you the truth. And I was fortunate enough, like one of the guys that I hung out with and, drank with and did drugs with, like his older brother happened to teach what's now called mixed martial arts. And at that point in time, it didn't really have a name other than like, oh, it's that UFC stuff, and because I just was kind of floundering, but I still had that background of like having trained very hard in high school. And again, this was not a time period like today. This was the early mid 90s when I was in high school. And, I was the only person that lifted weights and trained in my high school. And, I used to go out in the winter time and, attach my backpack from school to a coaxial cable to a weight belt around my waist and literally run sprints and drag that thing in the fields behind the high school. And I would go and like set up baseball drills. And this is in Massachusetts is a cold state here. It's not like it was temperate weather here, but I would be out the whole, outdoors the whole winter. I would go to the gym. I built a gym in my basement by myself, and I had a squat rack, a bench, a vertical leg press. I had a leg extension, a leg curl. I had an easy curl bar, barbells, those adjustable dumbbells with the spin collars. I had a decline sit-up board. I would work out down there for hours in the wintertime and the off season. And, I loved it. It was escape for me. It was escape from everything. So fast forward to like kind of, bombing out of school and college and baseball falling apart and sort of like working in a grocery store and abusing substances and kind of going nowhere. Like I think I went back to the well in terms of finding something I could train for, because I did get into the early days of mixed martial arts with my friend's brother, who, really took me in and really helped me out. Like, was a father figure for me, was a coach for me, was a friend, was everything, the guy practically taught me how to tie my own shoes, Like I got to him like very raw, And he, I think, really is someone that specializes in dealing with those kinds of situations. And he got on track. And at a certain point, I kind of got myself back to going to college. Losing my identity as an athlete, like as a baseball player, was a huge blow to me. It really was. And that first big failure of not doing well in college, having to come back home, kind of failing out, bombing out, that was tough, man. That really put me in a bad place that I don't even think I fully realized at the time as like a, 19-year-old kid. But that man got me right, and he got me back into school. And, my original path was not with exercise-related stuff. I was a history major, and I was planning on teaching history for, in the high school level, and probably coaching baseball and football. That's sort of what I had in my mind. So I graduated with a history degree and a pedagogy minor. And when I graduated, there were no jobs. There was a hiring freeze. So it was kind of like, oh, okay, oh boy. And I was back at home, and, where I'm from is like a very small rural place by the ocean. And like, I was working a job with a fish delivery company, and waking up in the morning super early and driving out to the big factories to get, crates of lobsters and bags of clams and, and dragging tuna fish, swordfish, and, scaling these things, gutting them, putting the bands on the lobster's claws, the whole deal, and delivering these things to restaurants and high-end fish markets. And it was brutal work, and, I remember my coach at one point just saying to me, like, dude, like, why don't you just work in fitness in some way, shape, or form? Like, you train harder than anybody. You diet super hard to make weight for fights. Like, what are you doing? Like, it's like a clear and obvious path for you. And I really couldn't argue with him. Like, he was right. So I went back to school. And this time I actually got into an athletic training program. And I thought athletic training basically was strength and conditioning. I didn't know that athletic training was a little bit more on the medical side, and that it involved like, taping ankles and spraying Gatorade bottles into athletes' mouths and stuff like that. And so when I found out that I was in that kind of a program, I was like, oh, this isn't really what I want to do. I was fortunate at the time because I was still competing as a fighter. I was still going to the gym. I was still really working hard at the gym. And there was a woman that was always there, okay? And she looked like a pro. She had the funny shoes that looked like bowling shoes, and like her clothes were impeccable, and she'd be doing the Olympic lifts, and like it was clearly spot on and perfect. And I remember like for months, I feel like I would look at her like, wow, you're unbelievable, and she would look at me like, all right, dude, you're killing it. And I think eventually like we talked, and she was like, yeah, I'm actually a professor here, and I'm starting a brand new strength and conditioning master's program. And I was like, well, I'm in the athletic training program. I think that what you're talking about sounds a lot better than what I'm doing. And she's like, well, it is better, and she was like, yeah, you'd be a great fit. Why don't you just transfer over into the program? So I was in her inaugural class, and there were 4 of us, all right? And it was super cool because we all trained together. Like, I started getting into weightlifting and training with her, and she's, unbelievable. She set, masters women's world records and competed all over the world. Has her own weightlifting school now and is a coach and total badass person. But it was like early days of like internet communication. I think we had some messaging between the 4 of us. At night I would go to the library because I had nothing else to do other than train and go to school, and I'd read articles after articles and send these things inside this chat, and we'd all talk to each other all night. And then come back the next day and train as a group, and then go to classes with her teaching. It was unbelievable. You talk about like I feel like I've classically stumbled into great things my whole life. Like I don't know if you have Mr. Magoo as a cartoon over there, the blind guy that just bumps into things and makes. But I've always kind of found that I feel like a lucky Mr. Magoo.
Yeah.
Where, right place, right time, but I work my ass off, and people usually notice that, and they're like, hey, dude, like, you want to get in on this other stuff? Because, like, we work our asses off, too, and we love this, and you're, like, one of us. So, I basically just had this great experience at that school with that professor, with that first cohort of master's students, and I asked her where she got her PhD, and she said Springfield College, and I said, all right, well, I think I'm going to go get my PhD at Springfield College because I want to be just like you, because I didn't want to just be a coach. I wanted to be just like her. I wanted to be a professor and a coach, and that's what I did. I was always once I figured out how to lock in with school, I ended up being very, very talented as a student. And
do you think, Pat? Sorry to cut you. Do you think it was just you found something that you were extremely passionate about, and it wasn't hard for you to kind of take in information or put in the work to actually be good at this certain skill set? It just resonated well with you. Like, I mean, I dropped out of school at a young age as well, and I was a concreter before I became, an S&C coach, and I joined the army and I was finding my way, but I could never stick to anything until I found something I was extremely passionate about. And I'm no intellectual by far. I've got a very low educational background, and for me to actually stick something out and find interest in it, that's what kind of resonated with me in the strength and conditioning field. Do you think it's similar, that may have something to do with it, but just because you really enjoyed it?
I think it was a really good convergence of things, because I think, I always wanted to be a professional athlete. That's what I wanted to be.
I think most coaches do.
I never wanted to coach. I wanted to be the athlete. I still fall into that bucket, But, what it ended up being is that I think I have a very high disposition for being able to learn things very quickly. I think that I actually am someone that is very, very smart. And so it doesn't require much effort for me to be able to learn new topics. But I also do have a very strong work ethic that I think was imparted upon me by very important people growing up. But I'm also stubborn and oppositional and very difficult if I don't like something. Yeah. So if you put me in the wrong situation, like I'm unemployable. You know what I mean? Like if I don't like something, I'm not going to go along with anything, and I'm going to make it a nightmare for everybody else. So, it's, but if I'm in the right place with the right stuff and I'm motivated, I can really create a powerful trajectory.
Yeah, definitely. Look, I want to go back and just talk more about how you got into MMA and what that was like, who you trained with,
yes,
and how important it was back then for you to be obviously physically dominant based on your previous training, lifting weights, and how important that was. And if you noticed any advantages coming in with a lower skill set against someone who was more technically gifted, let's say they had a higher skill acquisition in the sport, did that play a big role in perhaps you just being more athletic in general?
I'll tell you, it was a different era than it is now.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it's like now, but it's a bigger sport. There's way more people involved. It's more developed and established. I'll give you an idea of what our situation was like. We trained in my coach's basement. And when I started, there were 3 or 4 other guys, all right? And they were, like I'm from Cape Cod. It's like there's a bumper sticker in one of the towns, and it says, a small drinking village with a fishing pond. That's the kind of place that I'm from. It's like
very rural.
But it's hard dudes. You know what I mean? They're blue collar guys.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of pickup trucks and guys that swear and like that want to be. It's a physical place. Like so. The other guys, like two of the guys, I think were longtime martial artists. One guy had a very extensive background in Kempo. Prior to moving to Brazil for a few years, he had started his martial arts journey in probably 1988, 1989, something like that. And he had started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu when he moved to Brazil and had been practicing at one of the bigger Brazilian gyms for a few years prior to moving back to Cape Cod. Mm-hmm. So he had received a purple belt at one of the Brazilian gyms, which is not an easy thing to do. It was, especially at that time period. I don't know what the belt acceleration program is like nowadays, but at that time, it would probably take 4 years to get a purple belt. Like you're looking at 10 years before anybody's given anybody a black belt, and he was a talented dude too. Mm-hmm. The other guy also was like a lifelong martial artist who, kind of got into it. So they had that very classical kind of Kempo karate movement style as well, and the flexibility and the snappiness combined with, early days real Brazil style jiu-jitsu, being a hard ass too.
Yeah.
Like let's turn the heat up as high as we can make it so that it's just as punishing as possible. Yeah, and there was no people you'd get choked with your belt. People would unravel your belt and choke you with it. My coach, the guy that ran it, he was physically kind of unable to compete with us because he had actually suffered a broken neck at some point. But he missed his time. I think that he could have been the kind of talent that won a UFC belt if his age had matched up with the timing of the popularity of the UFC. Because even with the broken neck, when he had to demo things or hit the bag, he's one of those guys that would fold the 7-foot tie bag like a taco. Where you're like, oh my God. And his pain tolerance and his essentially he was just a mean motherfucker too. Yeah. He was a scary dude. And so that was kind of the core in the beginning. And then we actually had a lot of guys from Brazil move to our area because it's a big hospitality area. So they'd come up to work in hotels and restaurants and stuff like that. And it just so happened that we had like 5 or 6 guys that moved up that were from Daniel Gracie's school in Brazil, which I think is near Rio. And a couple of them were brown belts, and there were a couple of purple belts, and they were all bad dudes, like very athletic. One guy was like almost a national soccer team level athlete, and which is a big deal in Brazil. Yeah. And, another guy, Juliano Coutinho, was a really good heavyweight. Juliano fought in the UFC a number of times. I think he had at least 7 or 8 UFC fights. He actually beat Tim Sylvia at one point, former UFC heavyweight champion. Some of the other guys, we didn't even know their full names. Like one guy was just like Jefferson, and another guy Nielsen, and there was another guy, Cacao won the North American Championships his first year here. He moved here. He was just like, a dude from Brazil that was a good jiu-jitsu guy in Brazil. And then he won the 2002 North American Championships and dominated everyone.
So we're talking about the Pride days. Like, are you talking about when you had Shogun, you had a lot of the old school guys where you've had like Vitor Belfort, you've had where there wasn't much testing going on, and there was a lot of athletic specimens.
Just gas them up.
Gas them up, and they would go. They weren't as technically gifted, but like Mark Kerr, if you ever watch his documentary.
The Smash Machine.
Oh man,
which is a crazy documentary.
Yeah, he's an absolute freak. What he put his body through.
So my coach my coach was very Bas Rutten-esque.
Oh,
and
yes.
we had every Bas Rutten video, just watching Bas Rutten do techniques on that guy, Matt, with the curly hair. Matt, please. He'd come over and then just poor Matt's just getting cranked on the whole time. And so we literally practiced from the Bas Rutten videos to the techniques that we used. And then the Brazilian guys had all of their techniques. And, I basically just got wiped out by these dudes originally, but they ended up being like, at least in the US, like top of the nation talent. The Cape Cod turned into little Brazil. And we were just this pocket where some of the best jiu-jitsu guys in the country happened to be. And we were all training in the same tiny basement together. And we would have guys visit. Like we had, Kip Kolar, who was the president of NAGA, the North American Grappling Association, which is like the big submission wrestling tournament stuff. Like him and his boys came down there one day and we just went to war with those guys. And they were like, what is this gym? Like you guys are unreal. Like, how does no one even know about this place, this random basement? And it was like, we don't know. It's just what we do. Like, so it was, it wasn't just a rinky dink thing. Like it appeared to be because it was in a basement, but it wasn't small level Mickey Mouse talent. It actually was like, we would routinely have guys that fought consistently in the UFC in there. Our guys were able to train and compete with UFC talent, beat UFC talent, compete in the UFC. We sent at least 6 or 7 fighters to the UFC over the years. It was cool. It was super cool.
Yeah, definitely. I think, it's a great way to release some of your inner demons, even if you're not looking to compete. And I mean, that's why I got into it. It's a good way for me to let off steam and, getting humbled by guys that are, 20 kilos lighter than you. And, it was just a different outlet that would fill a void that I wouldn't get from, say, the weight room. And
yeah, it's definitely a more.
Definitely.
It really is.
Now, I want to ask you something about archetypes. And since I've, this has been a while back, but when I started delving into Bill's work and speaking to Greg Hawthorne and after doing your course, I really started to look at archetypes within MMA and what kind of movement biases and the way that they would fight. Are they more elastic in nature? Are they... And a perfect fight that I think kind of paints a good representation of the differences between wide versus narrow. And I know that some people think that... I'm not trying to bottle people up into category A, category B, but if you look at Dustin Poirier versus Conor McGregor, and you look at Conor McGregor's style, and you look at the way that... just how light he is on the feet, got a big wide stance, he's got a good variety of movement, can change direction. And I work with Corey Sandhagen, who's a narrow to a T and possesses those abilities as well, very elastic. But when it comes to your wider individuals, I look at you as being a wide. Do you feel like when you were training with these guys, do you feel that played into your strengths in the grappling exchanges where you had to create some more isometric strength, where you had a longer time to produce force, in terms of your lateral movement being elastic and boundy and stuff. Do you think that plays a big role in the way fighters adopt to styles and movement? I know it's a pretty broad question.
Yeah, I mean, look, unfortunately now, it's been 20 years since I competed in mixed martial arts, which is like unbelievable to me. So
time flies.
20 years. Yeah, 20 years is a long time. So I've been out of that sport for 20 years. So for me to be able to speak intelligently on it is probably not all that possible. I can speak nostalgically on it. And I was good, you know what I mean? Like I was good enough to fight in the UFC. So I competed at 154.5 pounds. I'm currently 230 pounds.
Wow.
Like I have a different
Different body
compared
now.
to where I was. And, but I always struggled with endurance is what I think is the big thing.
Yeah.
And as a kind of a wide frame, that makes sense. And it didn't matter how much endurance type training, because I did the same training as the other guys, and some guys were great with endurance. And like the thing that would always catch me was trying to sustain the stamina. Like it was that was always the hard part. I had limited movement capabilities, but I think that's more from getting into the sport starting at 19, 20 years old, as opposed to anything like, you really, if you're going to be able to do all the movements of the sport, you kind of have to start as a kid.
It's a young man's game. Yeah.
It is. I think that if I could have started wrestling or something like that at 10, 12 years old, I don't think I would have had any limitations on the movements for the sport. And I would have been a lot more efficient doing the movements of the sport, which probably would have helped my endurance quite a bit. And I think I probably would have been a very, very good competitor had that been the case. And because I don't mean like, just being good at some random gym. I mean like being a top guy.
Yeah, world class.
Like, yeah. Because I was close to that, The only guys that beat me in competition were guys that were world-class level guys. And because the guys that I trained with happened to be, at that point in time, world-class level guys. I mean, my training partners beat UFC champions.
Wow.
All right? Multiple UFC champions.
Yeah.
So it was not a ragtag bunch of bums just kind of going in there and, rolling around. But at the same time, it was, because we were still a bunch of dudes,
Definitely.
But it was a top class group of competitors. So it's really hard for me to be able to speculate on body types and things like that, because I've been out of it for so long. I would just simply say, I think that there are some body types that seem to be excelling in the modern game. And I almost think it's, when we get into the skeletal constraints stuff that exists of archetypical shapes, sometimes it gets forgotten that there's also the archetypes of like anthropometric ratios of like, axial skeleton length versus appendicular skeleton length. And I think if you're going to be a great fighter, if you have really short appendicular bones, you're in trouble.
Yeah, 100%.
You have to have longer appendicular bones, and I think a smaller axial skeleton is really good from the perspective of being able to move it through space.
Yeah.
Well,
okay.
Like a John Jones type of body is like
Alex Pereira.
About as good as
yeah. It makes sense though, but like if you start to look at the champions and you start, I mean, I like to obviously see the way they move and make, when I just came back from America, I spent some time in Denver, Colorado with Corey Sandhagen during his fight camp. And I went to every skills-based practice session, and I was speaking to his coach, Trevor, and I was trying to ask him questions about what is it that you need him to do from a skills-based perspective. What do you need his body to do? So I could kind of connect the dots in the weight room to see if I could apply some specific work in order to get better at those positions indirectly. And they don't really understand movement, and getting them, speaking to them about what they wanted him to do, it didn't really give me any answers. So it was just talking two different languages. And but watching him move and then assessing him, and I know a lot of people don't like table tests, but I still use them, and I've done a shitload of them. And
who doesn't like
man,
is that a thing?
It is. I mean, there's a few people out there that on social media now that demonize table tests and say that, I think Bill likes to overcomplicate a few things in some ways, and will say things like when you're assessing a limb or assessing a femur through internal rotation, the spine is moving with it, and it's not a true representation of IR, and it's like, well, fuck, man, it's like, well, 6 months ago it was okay, and now it's not okay, and it's like, I'm not just saying it's him, but then there's other coaches that have adopted that. But I use it, and I it's part of my assessment protocol, and I've done enough of them.
That's the only thing I use, because it's standardized.
Exactly.
I don't care if things are moving. It's the same because the table standardizes everything.
You take kind of gravity out of the equation, and you can kind of just see where things are passively, right? And assessing Corey and then assessing a wrestling coach, both narrow, complete different. You could see that the wrestling coach had 45 degrees of passive IR in his hip. He had 60 degrees of ER. And you assess an MMA fighter who's heavily compressed, years of, compensation to fight that way. He had like 5 degrees of IR and, 40 degrees of ER. And it was, when you got him on the feet and you could see it, it was still there. There was a lot of limitations, and there was a lot more food on the table that could have been eaten in terms of like improving this low hanging fruit.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time with just giving him back some of these, trying to kill two birds with one stone, trying to give him back some of these relative ranges of motion, but also improve force production to get him in better positions to be able to do that. And it seemed to work great for him, and it wasn't flashy contrast sets that you see a lot of guys doing, because to be honest, it just wouldn't do him any justice, at that present time, until we worked on the bigger priorities. So, I guess coming back to full circle in terms of table tests, are you still using them now with the current clients that you work with? Yeah.
I mean, I don't work with people in person anymore. It's just like I'm out of that.
Yeah.
And when I've got some online people, and I teach seminars, and I try to write and I talk. Like that's sort of where I've put myself professionally. But I'll tell you what, when I have to teach a seminar, I got to do, and that to me is holding your feet to the fire as much as anything, because you're out in there in front of everybody, and it's kind of like, well, I have to show you that what I'm talking about works. And because there's no worse feeling than going out there showing table tests, using an intervention, and then having the same results.
Yeah.
So it's like I feel like those experiences are worth 1,000 clients in some ways, because the pressure is so significant in those instances. I can't screw up, and I generally don't. It's like I do think that the model that I created and that I follow decreases the likelihood that I'm going to screw up, because it takes all of my in the moment decision making out of my hands, and I just follow sort of like an automated process. And so it's, if I need to work with someone in person, it's not hard. It's not hard to transition into that, because I built an algorithm that I always follow. Like it's a weird thing. I feel like it's almost like what bands feel like if they're one-hit wonders.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, hey, we made it, and but now they only want us to play this one song. But I hate this song, but it put my kids through college. And it still gets me out to go on tour, but you know what I mean? It's a weird relationship. So I feel like I built this algorithm, and it's like, I'd like to do other stuff and be creative, but the damn algorithm works so well that I dare to stray. I don't dare to stray away from it, because, it's probably going to be a worse decision than what I put into the decision making.
I think that it's like, your model and your framework. You have a system that works with the clientele that you work with, and I think that you may add a little bit more. You might add some slight tools to the model and framework, things that you see value in, and things that you try on yourself and experiment with a few clients, and you get positive outcomes. I think that that model just continually evolves. But when I just wanted to go back with like you having a wealth of experience working with people face to face. How long, where did you start? Obviously you're in, is it Boston? Was it Boston?
No, I'm in New York.
New York now. So New York is like Sydney CBD in Australia.
Right.
I worked in close with Angus Bradley, and we worked in the CBD with a lot of fitness. Not fitness. A lot of guys in finance, a lot of corporates. Where back then you had to be in good shape, you had to be well presented, and you had to know your stuff. You're working with professionals that are very scarce with time, and you had to get results, and you had to be sharp, and you could charge top dollar. Were you working with professionals like that in New York, or were you working more with athletes?
No, it was more professionals, but I feel like it's like I kind of wish I had more of the people that you did. It sounds like, I feel like, in Manhattan, people are so distracted with everything. Fitness is so low down on their priority list, but it's almost like it's the same as like having a driver or your equestrian teacher, or I don't even know, your home chef. I'm the help. I'm just part of the help at that point with that population, and they couldn't tell their ass from their elbow in terms of who's a good trainer or what's a good program or what results are or any other thing. It was the lowest motor competent people I've ever seen in my life, and I'm grateful I worked with them because I hated the inabilities that they showed so much that it's actually what made me create the damn model that I did. Because I can't live with looking at horse shit all day, principal. That's the truth.
Oh, fuck, we got to make a reel out of that one. I understand. And I tell you what, a lot of people rave on about, a lot of coaches I speak to, they like young coaches, they want to work with athletes straight away. And they want to think it's cool, you work with athletes. And I'm like, you need to work with someone who moves like horse shit, as you say. Yeah. And that will challenge you and bring out a skill set that will carry you through to working with athletes, and will teach you how to solve some problems that may not be presented working with perfect movers all the time. Well, not perfect movers, but people that just understand where their elbow is, I guess. So
yeah, man, I'll tell you, like, it's funny because athletes are always looking to compete against the best to prove that they're the best. And I think that, we were kind of talking about, trainers are probably all people that wanted to be athletes in some way, shape, or form. And then we kind of get thrown into So then we want to work with the best or challenge ourselves the most. The interesting thing is it's the inverse. The greatest challenge you can face as a coach are the least competent exercisers. They're actually the pro league, so to speak, of our discipline. If you work with athletes, they can do anything very easily. It's like you could say the wrong thing and they'll be able to do it, but they'll do it so well that it ends up being fine. Yeah. You know what I mean? Just it's weird in a lot of ways. But any asshat can kind of get a pro athlete to do something pretty well. But if you can take an absolute motor moron and get them to do anything right, that's impressive to me.
Yeah.
And, the other thing is I am so unimpressed with exotic exercises and fancy drills. What impresses me is, and I think the hallmark of a great coach, is how regressed can they create an exercise.
Exactly.
That is the demonstration of intelligence of a coach.
Yeah. And I think that working with that, let's call them motor moron population, or just a general population, people that aren't familiar with exercise or don't have a sporting background, they can't hinge, they're poor at squatting, they just don't know where to position the center of mass.
Forget that. I had people that couldn't do a plank. Legitimately. Hey, you doing a plank? Where do you feel this? Like in my back, in my hips. Like, I'm like, you don't feel your abs at all? No. I'm like, oh my God, like
Yeah.
what is happening right
And the
now?
thing is, they can't actually tell the difference between pain and discomfort, which is confusing.
Right.
So getting them to, I'm saying, look, fatigue is okay. You are going to experience a bit of muscle soreness. This is going to feel like pain, but if it's going, do you feel like there's a difference between injury and pain? Trying to communicate that to someone who's never felt discomfort like that before
Yeah.
is quite challenging. Now, this is why I find rehab enjoyable, because you're forced to regress exercise to the lowest constraint, and it gets you really good at load management and understanding lower forms of training. And I think that rehab and the rehab scene or the physio scene is a mess, in my opinion, where you have to really, like, this is why I've delved into some of your concepts and Bill's work, is really finding ways or looking at an exercise, and if you train yourself, you can kind of relate to this a lot better, because you're in the weight room and you're thinking about things and you're like, well, fuck, if that hurts my knee and I give that to this person who's just had a meniscus surgery, it's probably not going to be ideal. And you get creative with regressing exercise through self-exploration, but then looking at challenges where, for me, I look at an MMA fighter or a fighter who wants to work with me who has no underlying conditions, which is very rare. They're all pretty much broken. So the reason why I've worked with the combat sport industry is because I like the challenges of problem solving, where you have to regress and you have to think about exercise selection, and load management is extremely crucial working with these guys. And a lot of coaches don't like the problem solving around that. And I think you develop those skill sets working with general population. 9 times out of 10, they're going to come to you. I've got a sore knee, I've got a bad back, I've got a sore neck, I've got sore shoulders. And, it's going to take a bit more than just smacking them on a bench press. It's going to take a little bit more critical thinking in order to get results with these guys. And I feel like that now is pretty much 80% of my work. And the rehab to performance, plyometrics is still rehab to some degree, right? They're still end stages of rehab. Sprinting is still end stages of rehab. So it all does a full circle, in my opinion.
Right.
So with the guys that you're working with now online, are they still predominantly jam pop? Are you doing more body composition with?
No, I have really, my clients are like other fitness professionals.
Okay.
They're looking for coaching.
Yeah. Okay. So more mentoring.
And yeah, well, not even. I mean, they're just training for something, and I'm coaching them. So it's kind of a mix of aesthetic competitors now, and people that want to. I had one guy really describe it well. I want to look like I could be on the movie 300, but I also want to remain like being very athletic and running, jumping, throwing things. And I was like, okay, I feel like you're in my wheelhouse here. Like I can, that sounds good. So being able to solve for, a bit of the just straight up physique competitor group, as well as the hybrid physique plus, general athleticism crew.
Would you just call it good training, the hybrid model, or just good training that covers all physical?
Yeah,
qualities?
it's just got a couple more motor patterns. So like the physique athletes, it's kind of like, all right, well, we have squat, hinge, push, pull, single joint movements for aesthetic muscles, and then basically cardio. It's not rocket science. It's just good, solid program design with appropriate levels of progression of the quantitative stuff. And for the mixed group, they have a few more motor programs thrown in here. So they have locomotion, typically some kind of sprinting, change of direction, throwing, those things get added to the program design, which ultimately has to involve a detraction of the amount of volume going into the lifting motor patterns. There we go.
Got it out. Okay.
Having young kids is brutal, man.
Oh.
I had a good streak of being healthy, but then he brought the plague home last week,
mate,
and I've
tell
been
me about it.
trying to get over that. So
How many kids do you have?
one, I have a 4-year-old.
So do I. 4-year-old boy? Yeah,
Yes,
so do I.
yep.
How good is the age? It's a great age.
It's nice. It's nice.
Yeah.
And
He's your best friend at the moment? Does he just want daddy?
you know, he ebbs and flows between mommy and daddy. That's for sure.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, it's just always kind of getting better at this point.
Yeah, definitely. I didn't know whether you had kids or not because I'd never see you like on social media. It's all just business and ripping people to shreds. So
I generally don't want, like, I fear for him in terms of how much social media and phones is just going to dominate his life.
Yeah.
You know, he's not like public consumption in my mind, and like my whole I don't really want my social media to be me. I just want it to be like my business more than anything.
Yeah, definitely, and that's what I try to keep it like that. A little sprinkle in a little bit here and there, but my son started jiu-jitsu and just watching them move, watching kids move, they're like rubber, and I'm just like, man, I would kill to move like that. Like on the mats, like if I could move like that, man, I would be, I would do any sport. And
there's sometimes where I'm like, how did that not tear something?
Exactly.
Like, oh my God, like your leg. It was what just happened to your leg? It was no ramifications.
Nothing. I've seen my son jump off, 5-foot like bridges, and I'm like, how does he not break? He just rolls, boom, and rolls and rolls forward. So
they're like gelatinous.
Exactly. So yeah, I didn't know anyway. But so you're based in New York now?
Mm-hmm.
And how would you live in right in the heart of the grind, or?
I did. I moved out of it. I moved across the river to Hoboken, New Jersey. But I can look out the window and still see the skyscrapers.
Yeah.
It's the whole area is so condensed and insane. Like, I don't know if you've ever been here, but it's like I'm sure that Tokyo and other international cities that are just like monstrosities are similar, but it is just a megalith of a place, and I wouldn't mind getting the hell out of here, to tell you the truth at this point. But there's life logistics that kind of are currently still holding me here.
I mean, it was the same. It was the same as us, living in the CBD of Sydney. It was just the pollution, the traffic, and the freaking grind, the cost of living, and we just packed shop and we moved up north and live on the beach now. In Queensland.
Yeah, that sounds so nice.
I mean, that's where I'd be heading. I'd probably head to San Clemente. I spent some time in LA in San Clemente near the beach, and it was beautiful there. Good Mexican.
Yeah, there's some.
Man,
I've been to Santa Barbara once, and I was like, this place is perfect. Why doesn't everybody
exactly?
A little bit of money, but
just get a few more online clients, and you'll be there.
Well, that's kind of my goal right now, is to do more online coaching, because it is an area that when people do, but I find online coaching is so odd to me. Like, I'm always trying to get my clients to send me more stuff. Hey, communicate with me. Send me your videos. I can break down your technique and give you a tremendous amount of feedback. Or if something's going on with your body, I can really solve for it very quickly for you.
So
but they
don't.
What's going on? Show me, send me stuff.
I'll give you a little rundown. I look at roughly around between 200 and 300 videos a week with online coaching. When they onboard, it's compulsory for them. If they're a rehab client, and I've taken on 4 meniscectomies, 4 of them in the last week. They all happen from BJJ, believe it or not. And part of the agreement when they sign on, you're a rehab client. I'm not going to have time to coach you 4 days a week over a video. So I need to see the way that you're executing these exercises. And this is a two-way street for you to get success and results out of this program. And we need to, for me to do my job effectively, I need to see these videos. If I'm, you know what I mean? If you're charging X amount of money and the client's meeting you down here, it's not on you when you lay the expectation out from the start. And I think that when you are working with more rehab cases, the coaching is more intricate, where you need to monitor load effectively. It's daily feedback, it's weekly check-ins, it's 4-week calls. It's a lot of work, but for me, it's doing my job properly. And working with face-to-face, I feel like you need years of face-to-face work before you even think about going online. It's like, I like looking at it like this, like you're a mechanic, right? You've studied to become a mechanic. And you're like, all right, I want to go fix cars, but I'm going to fix them on, like, I've only ever fixed one model of car, which is a freaking, let's call it a Volkswagen Golf, right? I've only ever fixed this European car. And you want to go work with race cars, or you want to go work with cars that are 30 years old. Let's call them rehab cars. But you've only ever specialized in this one model. And it's like, well, how the fuck are you going to work with these cars online or even know where to start when you've never got your hands dirty working with an array of different models, trucks, utes, fucking buses, whatever. And you don't have that experience to call upon when you are faced with these challenges, because it gets 10 times harder online because you can't see shit as well as you can see, and you can't fix it on the spot. What do you think about the coaches that out there that just want to go straight online?
I mean, I just think it's a weird world at this point in time. Like, I just think back when I started, like, if you actually, the only way you could make a name for yourself is if you were like a world-class level athlete, or you were a world-class level gym owner, or, you know, top academic professional with an unbelievable pedigree. And now it's just like, you know, you have to be fairly good with a camera and understand how to make yourself marketable. And so we just have this army of people that have seen this pathway, and some of them can do it pretty well, and they are not really competent for doing high-level jobs with people. So it's kind of the blind leading the deaf, so to speak, and but it's like they just figured out a good way to be able to get themselves out there. You know, I think fitness has always been dominated by good-looking, charismatic people.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's really it. The most popular people in the history of the fitness industry are good-looking, charismatic people. They're not necessarily people that are really sophisticated with their understanding of training or, you know, how the body moves. And I think it just comes down to, like, the average person is unable to appreciate the skill set, or it's not even useful for the average person, the skill set.
Yeah.
You know, like, the skill set is a skill set, like, to go with the car analogy, a lot of us are Formula One race car pit crew guys that have the most sophisticated level of performance of automobiles imaginable. And, you know, do you need that in order to be able to work on some Toyota Corollas? No. Okay. Conversely, like, somebody that has the skill set for a Toyota Corolla, if they're like a really good looking guy or girl with a really good camera and the right clothes and lights and a good production with their videos, they can go places. So But again, it's sort of like who are they reaching? What's driving their popularity? Like they don't really need to be the Formula One pit crew if they're just reaching the masses.
Yeah. And we know, like living on the Gold Coast, there's plenty of those fitness influencer coaches that are making copious amounts of money that is just like mind-boggling, that we know personally. Some I've heard are close to $150,000 a week in Australian dollars, and it's ludicrous, driving around in Lamborghinis. And when you look at their Instagram, the information that, like, even just understanding human movement and what exercises are doing to the body, they have no idea. And it's, I mean, you can't say like, oh, I wish that, you can't be frustrated at those people. They made it. They put themselves out there. But one thing that I do feel like with the industry where it's shifting, it seems to be a sin these days if a coach is in good shape. Like
I know.
Do you know what I mean? I feel like you need to paint your fingernails black, and you need to grow a mullet in order to feel not intimidating. And they think that someone who's in shape is just this big meathead that only cares about their own aesthetics, and they have nothing to offer. But I think the older generation, I'm 38 now, I'm not really that older generation, but I always believe that you got to walk the walk and talk the talk. Like you have to have it. And if you're not doing it yourself, you see with rehab coaches who work with professional athletes, they look like a sloppy mess. And you couldn't demonstrate what you're actually wanting your client to do. I feel like that is leaving a lot off the table. Is that something you've experienced or felt in the past?
Oh yeah, man. Like I remember the first time seeing weak strength coaches, and I was like, "Who are you guys?" Like, just to me, it's always just been this very like distasteful thing to I don't even understand it. Like, I feel like when I got into the field, which was in 2004, really kind of like starting into the field, it was the only people that were in the field looked like they could rip your head off. And then all of a sudden, when I was a professor, towards the end of that period, I just saw these like lava lamps walking in, and I was kind of like, what? How did you even get into this? What's your motive factor for why you're here? Because prior to this, you could tell like, okay, you just want to train and be an animal, and you were a high level athlete, and like you don't even know what to do with yourself unless you're like putting your head through a wall and training super hard, and you want to learn everything you possibly can about this so that you have more ammunition. It was just like a bunch of crazy gun guys that just wanted to all have the biggest gun collection possible so we could all hang out for the weekend and just shoot bazookas together or something. And then it was like, who are you nerds that like somehow got in here, but you're so nitpicky and annoying, and like, bro, like shut up before you just get smashed. Like, but it was just such a weird thing, and it just seems to have kind of gone more and more in that direction. Where I'm like, in New York, just seeing like trainers that smoke cigarettes or something like that, or we're just like, if you're gonna be fat, you better be strong as hell, okay? But if you're fat and weak, like, why are you in this? What the hell is going on? Like, if I went to the dentist and they came out and had, one hunting and one fishing or none at all, I'd be like, I don't know about this situation here. I think I'm going to find somebody else. But, I don't understand the modern societal winds at this point either. Like, the American liberalism is the most confusing thing I've ever experienced in my life, that's so riddled with inconsistencies and hypocrisy and everything else, where I'm like, I give up, man.
Yeah.
I don't even understand this.
I saw it in LA. I'm fairly conservative, I'll say it. Me and my wife would be old school like that, and I'm not against anyone or anything like that, but it was like forced down your throat slightly in certain parts of LA.
It's crazy.
It is like stuff it in your mouth kind of thing, and I was like, I can't bring my kid up around this stuff. Like so we're that's why we kind of moved. We started, I think, big cities where there's a big diverse range of culture and stuff. But anyway, that's not what this podcast is about. But no, we don't need to go down that road. We're going to talk more about performance and the nuances with look and look.
I will say, at least in the U.S., it just became like an insult to other guys that you could tell them, like, dude, you look like you're going to vote for Biden. And you knew exactly what that meant. Like, it was just direct insult to your manhood.
Yeah.
And that got thrown a lot, And so that, to me, like, I'm not here to talk about viewpoints, blah, blah, blah. But, like, I just noticed that all of a sudden, that was an insult that was understood. Mm-hmm. That you could throw at another dude, and it was this equivalent of just going up to him and calling him a pussy right to his face. And it was like, okay, that is where we are now in this country from a divided viewpoint standpoint.
It's happening around the world, but look, I guess, I train in my garage, and, that's where I train. I don't like training at other gyms. I like training in my own space, and I don't get along training at other gyms other than just a fight gym. So now...
Yeah. I hear it. That's more and more kind of how I am going in life.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to know about it. Just stay in my little pocket, train hard, do my thing, leave me alone.
Exactly. Now, with I want to talk to you about, like, let's say, I understand, like, a lot of coaches don't have the luxury of doing the sport that their client or athlete, is involved in, and they're working with them in terms of improving physical preparation. How much value do you place on a coach dabbling their feet and feeling the demands of the sport in terms of them actually giving them more value to offer? How important is that, do you feel, in terms of coaching?
I think it means everything, particularly to the athletes, where there's a look, for the athlete to have a willingness to buy into my stuff, maybe I should show that I have a willingness to try what they do. I've always believed in the idea of, like, I'm never going to ask anyone else to try to do something that I haven't personally done. Yeah. I like to vet my own programs by having done those programs, to know that on paper they're good, but in reality, having done them, they have the right feel and look and flow. Yeah. Because I think that is a hard thing to necessarily, like, I've done plenty of times where I've written things down and been like, oh, this is going to go great. Then I do it and I'm like, this sucked. That sucked. I'm throwing that out. That was, I don't know why that didn't work very well, but it definitely didn't. And so, yeah, I just think we're physical practitioners. This is physical culture. Yeah. And, the physical part should be essential in my mind with it. I'm not saying you need to turn yourself into the epitome of their sport, but I feel like you should have some sense of what they're going through. I know in the U.S., like, every August, we have high school kids that die in football two-a-days.
So
always happens.
Say that again.
I said every August in the U.S., there's always at least a couple of kids that are going to die in football practice here.
What?
And it's usually heat-related illnesses or something along those lines. High school kids that, you hear, two kids at a Texas practice died from heat-related illness. Yeah, and a lot of times it's like, well, you have these coaches that just ask them to do something insane, and, it's 104 degrees and blah, blah, blah. The one I saw, nobody died, but it was I think 6 kids were hospitalized for rhabdo from a football practice because they were made to do 400 push-ups. And I saw this on social media, and I go to the comment sections right away because that's where the gold is. And there were so many comments. These kids are so soft nowadays. 400 push-ups shouldn't hospitalize anybody. Blah blah blah. I'm like, dude, you go do 400 push-ups right now, okay? Like, see what happens to your... What's going to happen?
Let alone
But
do those 400 push-ups after you just sprinted for fucking an hour and a half. You're dehydrated, and you're probably just coming to the back end towards of a hard training week. So, you know what I mean? And plus they got study on top of that and all other shit going on. 400 push-ups would crush them. But it's probably not just the 400 push-ups. It's everything.
Exactly.
It's everything.
It's all the stuff plus that randomly getting thrown in there. I don't know about you. If I had to do 400 push-ups, I would be absolutely trashed from that.
Exactly.
You know, like that's crazy. And I train all the time, but I'm not trained to do that. And I just feel like if you want somebody to do something, I think that you have had to have gone through it in some way, shape, or form. I do look at us as like kind of Sherpas for mountain climbing. And if you have never climbed a damn mountain or this kind of mountain,
how do you know the route?
How are you going to beat someone?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And that's a great way to put it. So, yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to be the Michael Jordan of climbing mountains, but you have to have put your time in and really experienced what these journeys are like.
Yeah, it's like you don't have to be a world champion, but at least get a sense of feel, the fatigue, the bumps, the bruises, the knocks. Yeah. So you can build a better relationship with your athlete, and the communication's there, and you get it. I mean, I snapped my Achilles wrestling. I've dislocated 2 sternoclavicular joints. I've chipped the bone off in my elbow. Got to get surgery on that. And it's like I took up the sport too late in life, and I was a shitty mover. I'm as stiff as a brick, and I don't bend, I break. So that's just how it is. So
every now and then over the last few years, I'll get in and roll with somebody, and I'll tell you, it's the worst. Like it feels kind of fun during it, and then the next day, I'm like, oh God, I can't turn my head. Like I'm just looking at it with just my eyeballs, and like my toes are just mangled.
Yeah,
and I'm not doing that again. That was a bad idea.
It's fucked, and that's why like now I still want to do it, but it's like, man, the only thing that's stopping me is my body. It's my body that's stopping me. So it's like, well, I pay someone who's a coach to wrestle with so I can build up my own intensity and move within my own limitations instead of getting in these funky positions that I can't produce force in. Right. Yeah, it's fucked.
You have no graded exposure to positionally.
No.
And like, okay, you go from 0 exposure. You talk about like load spikes and that kind of a thing. It's so specific to like the muscles used and the positions that you're doing it, and like, if you're not used to that, you're going from 0 to 1,000,000.
Exactly.
And how do you progressively overload that in a smooth manner?
I think you need constraints in training, and that's where you've got to pay money to a coach who can work within those constraints that you're facing, and that's how I got into it. I was doing PT sessions twice a week with a wrestling coach, and I fell in love with freestyle wrestling. And I look at these athletes in the Olympics. Fuck, man, if you were to rate who are the most athletic beasts out, I'd have to say freestyle wrestlers. Are just animals. The flexibility, the dexterity, the strength, the everything, how fit they are, robust and durable. I just think if I was a kid in America, I would be going into wrestling. My son would be doing it. Like it would be the first sport I'd pick. by far.
Yeah, well, I got a nice club that's actually around the corner from me.
Yeah.
But I think it's hard. You know, youth sports is a nightmare, really, when you get into it, because you can really create some tough relationships between you and your children. You know, when you try to push them into things they don't want to do. My son is clearly athletic, but he is defiant anytime you try to bring him to any sort of an organized activity.
My son,
You know, he just
my son was like that.
Yeah.
So I said to my wife, I'm like, look, you don't want to like, oh, I want my son to be a grappler. I mean, him to be tough and all this shit. Like, yeah, I do. I do want him to be tough and resilient.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
But I wrestled him at home, and I'd make it a game, and I would turn it into play where, you know, he'd take me down and get on top and mount and ground and pound and all that stuff, and it was fun. And he'd get hurt, and I'd let him hurt me and stuff and jump on my head, and but then you teach him boundaries. Now, when I took him to jiu-jitsu, it was so structured, and I'm like, he's gonna get over it within 5 seconds, and he did. He fucking hated it, and I said to him, look, I pulled him aside. I said, listen, I was like, Dad's proud of you. I said, I know that this is going to be hard and you don't want to listen, but I'm going to keep bringing you back. As long as you give me 100%, Daddy's going to be happy. Yeah. Let's go get a chocolate. And I'd go get him a fucking chocolate, and I'd take him back.
Smart.
I'd take him back and I'd reward him just for attending. And I know people in participation would, but guess what? He's now got a stripe, and, you know, he's taken kids down that are bigger than him, and he loves it. And he's learned that hard work comes with rewards. You work hard and you get rewarded. You get a stripe. And, you know, he's starting to fall in love with that process. But I tell you what, being a dad makes you a better coach. Even with your adults. You just learn patience.
Well, for sure. Yeah. You know, like my stuff that I do with them is I just every Saturday I bring them out and we go on a hike. You know, I drive out to where there's some mountains and we go out there and
get into nature.
You know, like this past Saturday we went for 3 straight hours.
Wow.
You know, and partly
did you carry him? Did you carry him half the way, or
I didn't. No, I went the wrong way on the trail for a little bit, so hopefully it was supposed to be about an hour and a half, and then I realized looking at the map, I was like, oh no, I really screwed this up, man. But and he hung in there for about 2 hours and 30 minutes or so, and then he went into full meltdown mode. You know, it started getting dark. He ran, he tripped, he scraped his elbow on some rocks. You know, the waterworks came out, and then the panicky breathing, you know, started to happen, and the pleas for I want mommy, and you know, all of the, like, I meet all the demons in my head in those moments. You know, because in my head I'm like, shut the fuck up. You know, like, ass up and fucking move. I don't give a shit. Like. And I'm like, whoa, where are these voices coming from, man? Like,
it's your trauma.
But they're, it is. It's all the people that pushed me when I was a kid and throughout my life, and like turned me into what I am. And it's hard because like that's my go-to is just like, man, shut up, bro. Like, get up and walk, you know. And I then I'm like, holy shit, I'm a mean son of a bitch, you know. And I was a mean son of a bitch coaching people, but when I was coaching athletes too, I wasn't nice. I would light people up, and all I see is that it shuts him down, you know. So I've really had to learn, like, and then I'm like, I don't want to be a fucking raging asshole to my son. Like, that's not good on any level. Like,
I can relate to that, Pat. I've lost my cool a number of times, and I. You know, you definitely regret it. You sit back and you're like, mate, I saw kids. He was at a park and he was, you know, trying to interact with other kids, and they started punching and kicking him. And I sat there and I was like, come on, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? And I was watching his reaction. And he was so shocked in his face that someone would punch and kick him for no reason. And he started lowering himself to their level and trying to fight back, and they were bigger than him. And it was my reaction towards the parent that affected him more than what the kids were doing. And until that point, they say that, you know, they pick up on everything, and they pick up on your actions and the tone. And you got to remember, like, he's 4 years old. Like, what does this kid know to 4, right? You're only going to destroy him by snapping at him, and, you know. So, yeah, I've learned a lot with that, and I think most men kind of struggle with that.
Very tough.
Yeah, it's extremely tough.
It is. But I agree. Like, I think that I've probably had more positive improvements as a person from the standpoint of patience and empathy, and finding new routes to be able to deal with situation over the last few years than my whole life combined before that, you know. And like you said, the guilt, when I look back, because in those moments, it's kind of like, dude, you got to shut up right now and you got to move, you know. Like, I've said things like that, and then I see the tears and the panic, and like inside me, that almost revs me up more in the bad direction.
Yeah.
And then 5 minutes later, I'm like,
down.
oh God, like, what am I doing? And like, take him aside and be like, listen, I am very sorry for the way that I acted. Okay? Like, you're doing a good job. I'm struggling right now. I love you no matter what.
Yeah.
You know, I care about you being strong and tough. The world isn't easy, okay? I want you to be a man in this world someday, and that's a hard thing to be. And you know, he might not even understand the words, but I think that like you said, they read and they understand the bigger picture of like, hey, my dad is like really coming down into my world and meeting me where I am.
Exactly. And I think, it definitely does. They say you haven't lived until you've had kids. And I honestly...
nothing prepares you for it, because it's not anything you expect. And most of it is just going to be meeting the parts of yourself in weird ways that you had no idea about.
Exactly. And I felt like...
Actually, going to mimicking you back to yourself.
Yeah, like, and he looks like you know what I mean? I was like, there's a little me there. And, you know, he does things that you know, and you're like, shit, he's got my temper. Shit, he's got my this and that. And I'm like, damn. But they definitely do say that stuff you've gone through in the past in your life. I don't want this to be some sort of emotional podcast, but it's... at the end of the day, like, I think it's important. There's probably going to be a lot of dads that are listening to this as well, that they say that whatever trauma you had as a kid growing up, it's going to, as soon as you have a kid, it's just going to stare you back in the face. And you kind of need to deal with it, or you're just going to push it onto him.
You know, for instance, I really learned at a certain point, it's a lot easier for me to be angry than it is for me to have other feelings, you know? And it's almost like I realized, like, at a certain point I was just having anger responses, and I was like, I'm actually not angry. I'm like feeling some other thing in these circumstances. Because I'll tell you, like, you know, where I live, it's a high socioeconomic community. It's very intelligent professionals, but they're, you know, they work in marketing, or they work in tech, or they work in some other thing, you know. So I always feel incredibly uncomfortable when I'm at these kid events with other parents. I'm like, I don't know what to talk with any of these people about. Like, we're from really different kinds of worlds. So I'm always like, you know, like, I'm just uncomfortable. And then there can be something that can... So I think that for me, I'm in those experiences. I feel kind of less than, because I feel like, man, if I got to tell these other people what I do for a living, they're just going to think I'm a moron or something like that. And I look like, you know, the big meathead compared to everybody else that just looks like, they don't look like me. And so I feel very much like the them compared to the us group. And so just being like the outsider, or whatever weird shit's going on in me, it's easy for me to then find something that I can get angry about, because it's a hell of a lot easier for me than dealing with the discomfort of feeling less than
Yeah.
in those circumstances, or outside the normal, the weirdo.
Yeah, I feel you. I don't think it's a less than. I honestly think it's a difference in values and morals. Like, you're someone who takes care of your body, you're someone who values health, values fitness, and majority of the parents that we see are overweight, out of shape, they're drinking, they're getting on the piss every weekend, and they're not. They just don't have the similar values and morals that we have, and
Right.
that's kind of what it is. You go to these outings, and it's like, oh fuck, there's no point. Like, what am I going to talk to you about? Like, what do you do for work?
Yeah.
And talk to you about how sleep deprived you are, having a kid, and it's shit small talk, and you just do it for your kids, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't go to those things anymore now.
I'm lucky.
Yeah.
Man. I'm still getting dragged in this damn
No,
thing.
that's good. As long as you
goddamn birthday every weekend.
Yeah, that's it. Well, mate, Pat, I think we're going to wrap it up there. But before we go, is there anything you want to talk about that you're doing in terms of your business, where people can reach out and find you? I'm going to attach all the links.
I just want to say, yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm thrilled that I didn't have to talk about the same shit I always talk about. I didn't have to go into ground and hip IR and ER and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, I mean, that stuff's got a good time and a place, but like, I think that, to me, a lot of times that becomes like people's primary goal. And I'm always like, that's just entry to the party for some people, like like for some sports, you need to have enough of that to be able to do the moves of the sports. But from a fitness standpoint, like, our job is still to create adaptations that allow greater expressions of aerobics and strength and speed and elasticity and propulsive power, like, and also just being real people that can hang out and talk with other people, so that you create a good atmosphere and experience for those people, and then just be real.
Exactly.
There's so many people that just are like that. Like, how do you have a conversation with somebody when all they want to talk to you about is like the problems that they find in table tests or something like that? Like, that doesn't matter as much as you make it out to be. It's like, at the end of the day, like, just being yourself and talking about like some of the things that are actually important to you in parts of your life and how you live and how you go through your day. Like, that's a lot more real to me in some ways. It's the part of the iceberg that's below the water.
Yeah.
Whereas it's like everybody typically talks to me about the tip up here, and it's like, okay, the tip gets boring at a certain point, and it's not the main part of the body of this thing.
Yeah.
It makes it what it is. It was a nice breath of fresh air.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. I hope the listeners got something out of it too. Look, I don't even. If you didn't do that, your fault. Yeah, it's all good. No, I like talking about the nitty gritty of things like that, and I just feel like I didn't have anything planned today, and the conversation was great. We spoke more about life, and I think that just understanding, your journey to where it got you today, and some of the life lessons along the way, is extremely important. And there are a lot of podcasts out there that. A lot of my previous episodes where we get into the nitty gritty of IR, internal rotation, being a downward force and all that stuff, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you for coming on. And
if people want the nitty gritty, I have that. I think the best nitty gritty for me is the book that I wrote, A Coach's Guide to Optimizing Movement. So like, it's got the model, it's got the explanation of the pelvis, the thorax, breathing. So if you like that stuff, and it talks about my views on table testing and what those things mean, and how I view movement, and the whole thing, like, it's a 320 page book that I think I put 4 years into that really speaks for itself.
Where can we find that book? Where can we get it?
That is, I got a link for it on in my Instagram, like bio link. You know, the bio link goes to the link tree, and it's in there.
Gotcha.
So
I'm gonna check it out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's. When I wrote that thing, I legitimately thought it was going to be, the next Supple Leopard or something like that. I really did. Like, I was like, you know what? This thing's so good, it's going to just destroy everything that's ever existed before in this industry.
Yeah.
And it sold okay, but it never did what I thought it was going to do. And I still think it's better than anything else that exists in terms of books in the field. So, and I get it. That's a fucking cocky ass statement to make. But I think if somebody reads the damn thing, they're going to actually understand why I'm cocky about it. Like, there's nothing else that compares to that book that anyone's put together.
Well, we're gonna pop it in the link below. So anyone, you can go and grab a copy of that book. I recommend it for any coach. I'm actually going to get a copy myself. I need some good reading material, especially when I'm traveling a lot. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I think, for people that really want to delve into my mind and my thought process and how I work and all, that is the deepest thing I've ever created. That's the place to go. I've got other stuff. I've got a ton of stuff. But, I'm more interested oftentimes in letting people know, like, man, I am a person. A person
not a robot.
with a very checkered past. I do not have a story that's like prototypical. Like, I have been through the ringer several times. I have experienced really weird, I've been a drug addict, I've been an alcoholic, I've been a professional fighter, I've been top 10 in the world in strongman, I've been in the dregs of, depression. I've been, I penthouse, doghouse, a lot of stuff from the time I was born. But I've lived. I've been through a lot of shit, and I'm a regular person. Like, if you want to, like, I like conversations where we can just say whatever the hell we want about whatever we're talking about, and you know what? Like, you can say what you want to say. I'll say what I want to say, and I'll respect your stuff. And you can, that to me is what it is. You don't have to be a perfect robot going through life that, like, checks every box and is anxiety about everything. Like, no, like, I managed to go through one of the weirdest paths to get to where I am. And I've done some really good stuff. And just because you've gone off the rails once, twice, 10 times in your life, at any point in time, you can always get back on. And trust me, I've gotten back on and fallen back off too. Like, it's a lifetime of this shit. And your professional stuff is just one part of this.
Exactly. Well, thanks for the for jumping on, Pat. And I hope to probably run this back in the next 12 months, and maybe we can get a little bit more nerdy on the next one for the listeners.
Yeah.
Mate, thank you.
Thank you.